Coming up, some big questions related to some of the SEC's quarterbacks and a bold projection for a former Florida star as he heads towards the NFL. It's all on the way next on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us, and thanks for remembering that this is the spot to be for SEC Talk every Wednesday, 3 p.m. for SEC Country Live. My name's Brandon Adams. I'm happy to have you with us. We're going to touch on so much of the SEC here on today's show. Looking forward to doing all of it with you. Our All Points Bulletin later on. We'll check in with a lot of the various SEC towns and everything that's going on there. We'll talk to Bill Bender from the Sporting News on today's program. Really looking forward to that. Bill, a great voice when it comes to keeping up with everything happening around college football here this offseason. We will do all of that over the course of our time together. And, of course, here on Facebook and on YouTube, we'll take a lot of your comments there as well. Now, I would start the show by saying, y'all make sure you're nice to each other in the comment section. Make sure you don't get at each other's throats and strangle each other. But I know better than that by now. You're going to do what you're going to do no matter what I say to do. So by all means, have at it. Rip each other. Mock your rival school. Whatever you want to do. Mock me. Many of you like doing that there as well. So however you enjoy being a part and participating in this show, will certainly give you a chance to do all of that here today. I want to begin above the fold, which is what we call our big story of the day. And it's actually a look ahead to what's going to take place on Saturday with a lot of SEC spring games in mind. I think one of the reasons why you have such a big glut of spring games here this Saturday, at one point in time there was a thought that maybe this would be kind of a time in which the NCAA would kind of lessen and loosen the dead period and folks could be recruiting here on this particular Saturday. That's obviously not going to happen, and now seems like June 1st is going to be when the day that goes down. But these spring games scheduled for Saturday nonetheless, 7 of them on tap for the SEC on Saturday. Let me run through the games real quick that are going to take place, and I'm going to tell you about what I think will be interesting about these particular games coming up on Saturday. So let me show you this on the screen here. These are the 7 SEC spring games that are slated to take place. All of these on SEC Network Plus, except where noted. And by the way, all of these, because we are Eastern Time Zone bias here, all of these are Eastern Time Zone there as well. So you got Mississippi State and Vanderbilt coming up at noon. Alabama is going to be 1 p.m. That's the one you can see on ESPN there. And then LSU's at 1 p.m., Georgia at 1 p.m., Auburn at 1 p.m., Arkansas there at 3 p.m. there as well. All of that taking place for the spring games coming up this Saturday. And it's a good chance for you if you got the SEC Network Plus, if you can figure out how to do that, the streaming internet there. It's a good chance for you to kind of settle in and watch a lot of what the rest of the SEC is going to look like as we head towards the start of the season. And I think you can kind of whittle down the spring games that probably will get the most attention, the one involving Auburn, the one involving Georgia, Alabama, LSU. I think the thing that's going to probably get the most attention related to a lot of this is going to end up being what happens there at the quarterback spot for these various teams. And I think that you have a really good chance of walking out of Saturday in a couple of different spots around the SEC with something that feels a little bit like a quarterback controversy. Now, the easiest place to look for this, the easiest place to see this taking place is probably somewhere like LSU, where really Les Miles, the LSU coach, has done very little to make folks think that there isn't at least a good bit of intrigue about who might eventually emerge as the LSU starting quarterback, whether it be Max Johnson, a guy we saw play well at the end of last year, and a guy who got the first snaps to start spring practice here this year, or Finley or Miles Brennan, who's back from injury, obviously Garrett Nussmeier, pretty impressive-looking quarterback prospect. And I think as it stands right now, I think there's even the folks in Baton Rouge may say this, by the way, I think there is very little certainty all the way around about who might eventually emerge as the LSU quarterback. And unfortunately, I think you look for LSU as potentially being one of these programs like a lot of places you see around college football where it's not just who you choose as your starter, but who kind of is end up feeling like the odd man out when this is all said and done. From that particular standpoint, is somebody kind of shopping around and thinking about putting their name in the transfer portal. Given the 4 quarterbacks that LSU has, the chance of them keeping all 4 of them, to me, does not seem to be all that great, because that's not really what anybody's doing right now. When you tune in to watch the LSU spring game, it's not just who looks good and maybe emerges as a potential starter as heading towards the summer, but it's who maybe doesn't get as much of a shot as he wants and starts to think, hey, maybe the grass might be greener somewhere else after all. I don't know if you've noticed this, but over the course of the last year, we've seen a good number of people decide that LSU is a place they don't want to be for a number of reasons. It's transfer portal, it's opt-out, it's everything else. LSU has had a very difficult time maintaining roster stability. versatility. And this, unfortunately for LSU, and by the way, LSU is a team I've kind of picked to be a little bit of a bounce-back team here this upcoming season, but this feels very much like some of the quarterback battles that LSU had going on prior to Joe Burrow establishing himself in 2019, so keep your eye on that. Also, it's been interesting at Auburn here, where we've heard from Brian Harsin and offensive coordinator Mike Bobo making their evaluation of Patrick Nix, and in this, I should say Bo Nix. In this particular case, Bo Nix, not a player they recruited, not a player that they brought into the program. And it's been interesting to hear how honest Harsin's assessment of Nix has been. He wants him to play better, wants him to make better decisions. And it's almost like in some cases, prior to this, when it's Gus Malzahn, the guy who had recruited Nix into the Auburn program, it's almost like Malzahn probably stopped short of being as honest about that, as matter of fact about what Nix still needs to do, because let's face it, part of the referendum against Nix was also a referendum on Malzahn himself, just given the fact that that was the guy who brought Nix into the program. And frankly, some of the issues that I think that Nix still deals with around the Auburn program right now is on the basis of the expectations that Gus Malzahn set for him. Nix being a big-time player out of the state of Alabama in high school, being a highly rated recruit, being kind of a legacy name there at Auburn, Gus Malzahn didn't do anything to lessen or dampen those expectations whatsoever. Really went so far as to say that he thought he could be, a championship quarterback there at Auburn. That's a lot to put on a guy that you're also asking to be a starter from day one, which is what Auburn asked from Nix going back to 2019. So on Saturday for the Auburn spring game, it's a chance for him to show that he is ready to mature in a Mike Bobo-led offense. Brian Harsin, kind of an offensive-minded coach, so that's kind of there as well. Now, on the Alabama-Georgia side of this, it's not so much quarterback controversy stuff that could potentially emerge as much as it is for Bryce Young, the former five-star quarterback at Alabama. Folks simply want to see, if you're a Crimson Tide fan, you simply want to see him showing up and being as good as it sounds like he has been in kind of the closed-door scrimmages that are taking place up till right now. Can he validate the whispers that seem to exist around him? And for JT Daniels at Georgia, is it simply a situation where he can pick up this spring in front of fans and streaming video audience, everything like that, playing the way that he played near the end of last season when the Georgia quarterback fortunes seemed to really change once he was inserted there as the starter. So 7 big SEC spring games, a lot to keep up with. And as I said before, places like Auburn, places like LSU, perhaps other spots there as well. Maybe, you start thinking about some of these other spots around the SEC, a chance for quarterbacks to either establish themselves or, in the absence of a quarterback being able to do that, maybe the hint of quarterback controversy, not too early to start thinking about that around the rest of the SEC. This is SEC Country Live here today. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have you with us. Coming up in a couple of minutes' time, we're going to speak to Bill Bender from the Sporting News, a guy who does a great job covering all the offseason storylines. We'll talk to him about that, all of that today, including some of the spring game stuff that's going to take place here this weekend. We'll do that coming up. Before that, though, I want to talk about the Florida Gators here for a moment, as we'll kind of stay above the fold here for a moment. And I thought that Dan Mullen, Florida coach, made a very interesting appearance on ESPN the other day with Mike Greenberg. Greeny, he's going to host the NFL draft coming up, so he's doing a lot of draft talk with Dan Mullen. And really, Mullen kind of factors pretty prominently as you head towards this NFL draft. Curiosity about where Kyle Trask may go. Obviously, Kadarius Toney, the former Gators wide receiver, seems to be a name kind of on the rise when it comes to draft boards. And then there's, of course, Kyle Pitts, who might be the first non-quarterback taken in this year's draft. And I thought it was very, very interesting when Dan Mullen was speaking with Mike Greenberg about Kyle Pitts, the word in particular that Mullen used in this particular situation. This is interesting. It's from ESPN. Take a listen to this.
He's a tight end, that is growing into being a tight end, if you will, still. And in his mind, he sees himself that way, that he can be on the end of the line, he can set an edge, he can block, and he's still only 20 years old, which is kind of crazy when you put that into perspective of how young he is and how he's still physically maturing. Mm-hmm. But you put him in, and so defenses look at, okay, here's this tight end, and, linebacker, safety, will fit him off the run game. But then you put him out in the pass game and use his athleticism. And at 6'6", 245 pounds, I described him as a unicorn because he has wide receiver skills, he has tight end or freaky wide receiver length and size, and catch radius. And
So I think that's really interesting, the word unicorn that gets used by Dan Mullen right there. I think that's a very interesting word to use because in a lot of ways that's what Kyle Pitts really seems like, right? I've never seen a tight end generate the kind of draft buzz that Pitts is generating right now. Not just the fact that he may be taking number 4 overall in this draft. The Falcons, a potential candidate to do that, but the idea that other teams might be looking to trade up to get him, whether it's a team like Miami moving up a little bit, a team like Dallas potentially moving up a lot. There is beyond just the chatter that a tight end may go number 4 overall, there's the idea that teams may mortgage their future to get to that number 4 spot in the hopes of being able to take Kyle Pitts. And obviously, if you're Florida, you celebrate that. I think Florida has used that as a recruiting weapon. It's one of the reasons why they probably initially gained the commitment of Rick Gilbert, the former LSU tight end, before Gilbert decided to stay at LSU. Or at least potentially staying at LSU, let's just say it that way. But the thing you're left to wonder with Pitts being, as Mullen himself used the word there, such a unicorn, so different than anything else, you almost wonder, can you sell the possibility of being another Kyle Pitts at Florida, given the fact there may never be a prospect of this caliber again at that position who looks that same way? In Florida with Pitts, as unique as he was, still lost 4 games a year ago. And given the fact that you got to try to replace him and Kyle Trask and Kadarius Toney and all these other weapons, you sort of wonder, is it a big step down for the Gators this year? And as you watch these guys get drafted in the NFL, a lot of Gators fans don't wonder, from an offensive weapon standpoint, how soon can we have it this good again with those kinds of weapons? Obviously, a lot of Florida fans talking about that in the days to come. We'll do some of that in our comment section here today. But for now on SEC Country Live, as promised, I want to say hello to a guy that does a great job covering the SEC and all of college football. And it's that kind of time of year where folks are settled in, getting ready to watch some of these spring games and see how it all takes place. One of the guys who'll be watching very closely and writing all about it for the Sporting News is our buddy Bill Bender. He joins us here on SEC Country Live. Bill, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you being here, and I hope the offseason's going well for you as we head towards something that maybe feels a little bit more like normal college football here later on this fall.
Yeah, Ohio State's doing their spring game this weekend, 18,000 in the stands. Various stadiums going to have various numbers. It's a good, positive step. It's 2021 might be something more like what we're used to.
Indeed, that's the case. And unfortunately for some SEC teams, being a little bit more like what they're used to, kind of feels like quarterback discussions kind of ongoing here. One of the things that we talked about a little bit before you joined us is LSU is also one of these teams that has a spring game upcoming. And, you listen to Ed Orgeron so far this offseason. To me, anyway, it certainly doesn't seem like he's given you much of a clue as to whether it be Miles Brennan, who's played before, Max Johnson, who's playing near the end of last year, a freshman like Nussmeier coming in trying to, gain some attention and earn the chance there. It sounds like LSU is a long way away from settling on its quarterback situation, which I think unfortunately reminds a lot of LSU fans of what the normal used to be. The old normal was kind of pre-Joe Burrow in 2018, 2019, where you went into every spring just hoping you could find a quarterback as opposed to knowing how good your quarterback's going to be. I think LSU can be a bounce-back team, but I think there's some real serious questions there at the quarterback position for the Tigers, at least at the moment.
Max Johnson played well in that game against Florida last year, and that really kicks off the debate. Miles Brennan obviously experienced, and part of the problem is when you have somebody that sets a bar like Joe Burrow set, they're not going to find a quarterback to meet that, probably ever. So, I think Johnson's the guy with that young talent that they have that I'm kind of keeping my eye on. But like you said, Nussmeier stepped in, and, talking to the first thing I got to do is get Eric Gilbert back in there, and then they go from there.
Yeah, exactly. We also mentioned Auburn a moment ago there as well, and I'm kind of curious from your perspective, with Bo Nix getting a chance to work now with a new coaching staff, Mike Bobo, who knows the situation around the SEC, Brian Harsin, kind of an offensive-minded head coach, is this fresh start with new coaching staff a good thing for him, or the fact that they don't quite have the emotional ties to him that someone like Gus Malzahn would have had because Malzahn brought him into the Auburn program? Does that end up being maybe a bad thing for Nix? What do you think about Nix right now kind of working with kind of a new coaching staff here at the moment?
Aside from the last couple of years, Boise State has a pretty good round of quarterback. So I think it could benefit from a fresh set of eyes. Maybe that scheme that Malzahn runs wasn't the best for a guy like Nix. I know he can run, but his big thing, he needs to become a more efficient, accurate passer that makes better decisions with the football. And maybe Brian Harsin can do that. So, Auburn, again, they're in that kind of same discussion as LSU. You're wondering who's really going to challenge Alabama. I still think Texas. But LSU or Auburn, depending on how that quarterback position goes, and I know it's a hot topic because they're going to need it to compete.
I think that's exactly right. It's very interesting. Every time we have a guest such as yourself on the show, one of the things we're always curious to find out opinions on is, with Alabama sitting on top of the SEC West, reigning national champion as well, do you see anyone on that half of the conference that has any legit shot at making it a challenge for Alabama, threatening them there in the SEC West? How easy is the road right now for the Crimson Tide on the west side of this conference?
Well, I mean, A&M can make it interesting, but I don't think they're good enough to beat them. I mean, they're a new quarterback coming in. I think Ole Miss is kind of the fashionable team. They're going to be that made-for-TV team this year because they're going to play a lot of exciting games where they may score 50 and give up 50 in the same game. Lane's got a lot on the offensive side coming back, so I don't think they can do it every week. That's the problem. Alabama, they may lose one game, but we'll see them losing twice on that side of the division.
Let me squeeze in one more before we let you go, Bill. We always appreciate your time. I thought it was really interesting the other day. I saw Paul Feinbaum talking about how things have changed in the SEC in terms of what generates conversation on his show on the SEC network. And he says, it used to be that Auburn, Alabama, Iron Bowl talk, if you wanted to stir it up and get callers kind of fired up with each other, talking Iron Bowl was the way that you got that done. He says it's different now. He says on his show, he sees it more as like a Georgia-Florida type thing. And that's really the rivalry that's emerged in the SEC last couple of years. Partially because Florida won the game this past season. They like to kind of, rub that in Georgia fans' face. Yet Georgia fans kind of think they're going to kind of get back in that with Florida this upcoming year. Where do you kind of see that Georgia-Florida rivalry standing right now in terms of the pecking order in the rest of the SEC that includes Iron Bowl and obviously a lot of other historic rivalries there as well? What do you think about that feud ongoing between the Dogs and the Gators?
Well, entertaining rivalries emanate from the coaches. And right now you have a dynamic there. I mean, there's no dynamic between Nick Saban and Brian Carson, right? You're not going to generate a lot of big-time bulletin board material from that. But Florida, Georgia, I mean, with the personas that Kirby Smart and Dan Mullen have, they don't mix well. They lead to some trash talking back and forth, whether it's passive-aggressive or outright shots. And you know what? College football is better when you have that. I grew up with, hearing about Bo and Woody, and then, we watched Bowden and Spurrier do this, and so on and so on. It's always better when you have two schools. Because, for the foreseeable future, those are the two schools that are going to compete for the SEC championship, and I don't see that changing in 2021, 22, or 23.
Yeah, I think you may be right about that, Bill. Certainly very interesting. For folks who want more of what you're doing there online, writing for the sporting news and all kinds of other, social media things like that, how can folks find more Bill Bender?
Yeah, I'm at BillBender92, sportingnews.com, and following away at some spring content, some NFL draft content. It's always good to talk to you, and I appreciate all the shares and likes and all that kind of stuff.
Bill, great stuff there. That's Bill Bender from the Sporting News, as a part of SEC Country Live here today. Interesting to get a chance to hear from him, of course. A little bit of a cell phone issue there, maybe. I feel like we had one of those last week, too. Boy, it seems like sometimes you can't quite catch a break. But it's always fun to have Bill Bender as a part of the show, weighing in on the situation between Georgia, Florida, and kind of the outlook for Alabama there in the SEC West. And that's what we want to try to do. The folks who are out there, gathering that news, sharing those opinions, we'll try to bring those for you each and every Wednesday at 3 p.m. on SEC Country Live. But one of the things that's going to make this show different, and many of you who've been with us for years kind of understand this. This is not just bringing on, fancy sports writer, guy who has a big following, and guy who has plenty of platforms to share his opinions, and hearing from that person. That's not just what we're going to do. We're about more than just that on a show like this. We want to also give you a chance to weigh in. It's one of the reasons why we've always been interactive. It's one of the reasons why we've always enjoyed having those comments be a part of what we do here. So we've got more SEC news to come. Interesting stuff coming out of Knoxville. I thought one of the Tennessee assistants said something very funny. We've got a very funny story involving Nick Saban before we're done today. Kind of a bold claim by a Georgia running back we'll get to before the show is done. So we got a bunch of ground to cover, but sometimes you just sort of have to pause and kind of reflect and let folks get a chance to weigh in here. So we'll do a lot of that with you on both our YouTube and Facebook comment sections, and then we'll kind of get back to the rest of the SEC news here for a moment. Mark Morris checking in. Mark, thanks for the kind words. He says it's great to see us back in the saddle again doing SEC Country Live. And I tell you, Mark, it's fun to be doing it, and we would not be able to if folks like yourself didn't tune in to watch, so I certainly appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here. Darian Ford, much the same way. Appreciate the kind words on there as folks check in on Facebook and having a good time talking about all of this. Let's get some Facebook comments here coming in as well. Joel Janet Bobo saying that Nix is right now just a fair quarterback. He wouldn't start if it wasn't for his dad. And obviously, that's kind of what Bo Nix, as Joel Janet brings up here, that's what Bo Nix kind of trying to fight against here, that he's more than just famous last name, that he's more than just big-time recruiting profile. And frankly, I guess here's the point that I would make about Nix at the moment. Don't be so quick, or don't be too quick to give up on the possibility that he could still make a big impact in the SEC right now. Because if you look around the rest of the league at the moment, he's got more experience what the Alabama quarterback is going to have this year. We assume that's going to be Bryce Young. The situation at Auburn, at least for the moment, seems more settled than the situation at LSU. I think that A&M may end up with a very good quarterback. I think Texas A&M is going to end up being a pretty good team, but you're more settled there. We had Matt Stringer in our Facebook comment section a moment ago bring up what Will Rogers is going to do for Mississippi State this year. He may be pretty settled in and established as a quarterback. You may say the same thing about Matt Corral at Ole Miss. We had Dave Bartu from College Football Matrix last week on the show saying that he thought that actually Corral sets up to be one of the SEC's best quarterbacks working in Lane Kiffin's offense there. But for the most part around the SEC, there's no more Felipe Franks at Arkansas, of course. For the most part around the SEC, and for the most part certainly in the SEC West, established returning starters at quarterback, there aren't very many of them. Now, in some respects, as I think the Bobos there kind of give us the idea of, I'm assuming, no relationship to the offensive coordinator, but from that standpoint, they kind of represent what a lot of Auburn fans feel of, hey, I'm not quite so sure this is our guy for this team this year. Don't be so quick to assume that the guy that led Auburn to a victory against Oregon to start the 2019 season, in comparison to some of the less experienced quarterbacks that exist around the SEC right now, don't be so quick to assume that a guy like that could not find success, given the fact that Bobo's tutored quality quarterback play before. I thought he had a bad year at South Carolina last season. I'm not going to deny that. But Mike Bobo's tutored quality quarterbacks before. As Bill Bender from the Sporting News just said a moment ago, Brian Harson's a guy that typically had a good quarterback when he was at Boise State, that this might be an opportunity for Nix to provide solid quarterback play for Auburn. And with early season games at LSU, on the road at Penn State, a chance for Auburn to kind of make a name for itself there in the early days of the Brian Harsin era. Mike Hernandez checking in to say, you pick future of the past. When was the last time you won anything in football? SEC championships are only, he says they're basically worthless. So that's a lot of the kind of chatter we get around here. And, frankly, that's one of the things that makes the SEC fun. Georgia fans, as Mike kind of goes back and forth with, we have a lot of Georgia fans in our comment section because some of them are with me every day on my Georgia show, Dog Nation Daily. But we have a lot of Georgia fans who do truly believe that this is going to be a bigger, better year for the Dogs than the last couple of years have been. And there are a lot of folks like Mike or everybody else in the comment section who are kind of looking forward to that chance to say no. You hear the 40 years, you hear all that kind of stuff. If you're a Georgia fan, you're well used to that, and that's kind of the stuff that's been going on in our comment section for years here on a show like this. By the way, Terry Crews, going back to Mike Bobo there at Auburn, says that Bozo knows how to coach quarterbacks. Obviously, that was one of the nicknames that Bobo kind of lived with for a while there with some Georgia fans who weren't too happy about him. And frankly, I thought last year for Bobo at South Carolina was a very weird year. I thought that South Carolina was very slow to go to Luke Doty at quarterback. I think that I think it remains to be seen how good Doty's going to be this year in the new Shane Beamer system there at South Carolina. But I think that overall, I think Doty was a pretty talented quarterback, and I thought that much the same way you see this from a number of coaches from time to time, a little stubborn, a little slow to just take the young quarterback and remove the veteran, especially in this case. Colin Hill was a guy that Bobo had known going back to his time at Colorado State. I thought the change over from Hill to Doty was a little bit slow, and I think that South Carolina would have been a better program, better team this past year had they made that move just a little bit quicker. LB Elizabeth checking in to say that Bryce Young's going to turn a lot of heads this season. I mean, Saturday's a chance to do that. You get the big TV schedule. You got a lot of folks tuning in there to ESPN. They want to see Bryce Young. Here's the one thing, though, and I'm going to keep saying this, and we talked to Bill Bender about this a moment ago. Don't be so quick to assume that it's an easy transition when you go from Steve Sarkisian, whose offense a year ago was as good as I've seen anyone's be in college football. It may have been the most high-powered offense I've ever seen. And yes, Alabama had good coordinators before that. I think Loxley had a good year prior to that. Brian Dable was certainly a diamond in the rough. He's doing big things now with the Buffalo Bills. Nick Saban kind of pulled him out of obscurity when he hired him for the 2018 season, and obviously Lane Kiffin before that. But Last season, Steve Sarkisian just simply made it look easier than it actually was. And you take a guy like Devontae Smith, even after Jalen Waddle goes down with injury, and Devontae essentially produced a typical Devontae Smith season, and he produced Jalen Waddle stats there as well. That's how amazing it was. Getting more out of Mac Jones, and let's face it, Jones may end up being the number 3 overall pick in the draft coming up. Steve Sarkisian got more out of him compared to his recruiting profile, got more out of him than anyone ever thought you could possibly be able to do there. And you say, well, you're going to bring in Bill O'Brien, former Houston Texans coach, and it's just going to be a seamless transition. Sometimes it's not quite that easy. And Bryce Young's going to have a lot of attention on him. I don't know that the wide receiver room, John Mechie, I think is obviously a very good player, but overall, whether you're talking about guys like Javon Baker, whomever else, I don't know that wide receiver room is as deep as it's been in the past. I do think the changeover offensively for Alabama, new starting quarterback, new leading receivers, Najee Harris not there anymore, new offensive coordinator. I think all of that creates a little bit of an opportunity for the rest of the SEC to exploit. I think certainly the SEC West to exploit. I think Texas A&M is the program in the best position to be able to do that. But the opportunity here with lack of continuity change over Alabama is a potential opportunity for some of the rest of the SEC West. Let's bounce through a couple other comments here. It's good to see Tennille Calvino in here representing UGA fans in the comment section today. Always a fun thing to be able to do. Ronald Cavalier checking in to say go Tigers, gives you the G-E-A-U-X, the traditional Louisiana spelling there. So having a good time there on that. Tennille, thanks for the kind words. Dave Davidson checking in to say loving Tennessee football. Yeah. By the way, news just breaking as we come on the air here today. Tennessee finally gets its first commitment from the class of 2022. Our buddies over at Saturday Down South had something on this just a moment ago. It's Elijah Herring, a Murfreesboro, Tennessee native, 6'2", 225-pound prospect out of Riverdale High School. So for a VOLS staff that had gotten off to a very slow start with its 2022 recruiting cycle and obviously dealing with a bunch of bad news there as well, Dave, I'm sure happy to know they Tennessee now has its first commit there for the class of 2022. Boy, a lot of folks checking in and a part of the program here today. Everybody having a good time in the comment section. We'll keep a lot of this kind of stuff going. All kinds of fun stuff here on both Facebook and YouTube on SEC Country Live here today. Let's kind of check around the rest of the SEC here for a moment. Let's do our all points bulletin and check in on a number of spots around the SEC. Let's go to Starkville, Mississippi for a moment, where you're kind of left to wonder what Mississippi fans think of the pretty substantial compliment they recently got from ESPN. So ESPN has put out its preseason projections, its analytics projections. They call them the Football Power Index. You hear it called FPI a lot of times. The top 10's been shared on Twitter a whole bunch, and I think a lot of folks thought this was maybe like an intentional act of trolling on the part of ESPN. Certainly it was kind of strangely received when you saw the top 10 here from the ESPN FPI. Now, I'll show you this on the screen. Up at the top, kind of what you expect to see. Obviously, Alabama number 1. Not a huge surprise to see Oklahoma at number 2, especially given the fact that one of the things that kind of quietly went under the radar last season was the fact that Oklahoma quietly played better defense last season than kind of people might realize. Part of the reason for a nice preseason projection from them. Clemson at 3, no big surprise there. Iowa State's at 4. That seems a little ridiculous. I think that Matt Campbell's a pretty good coach, but the idea that there's only 3 teams in the country better than Iowa State, probably don't believe that. Ohio State, Texas A&M, nothing too weird about that. Georgia at 7, nothing too weird about that. But then lo and behold, look at what you see at number 8. The number 8 team in ESPN's FPI preseason projection is Mississippi State? Are you kidding me on this? And as I said before, when you see this show up on social media, ESPN Stats and Info tweeting that out, and you go online, see the full projection, you're almost left to wonder, was this meant to be a joke? Was this meant to get people kind of riled up and stirred up? And you see him on your screen there, Mike Leach. Of course, a lot of folks like Leach, but I told you this going into the start of last season. The Mike Leach is not a personality fit for the rest of the SEC. Mike Leach does not fit in well with this league here. And I know we had commenters a moment ago mentioning in the conversation about quarterbacks around the SEC what Will Rogers is going to be able to do in the Leach offense this year. And typically speaking, Leach teams get kind of a year 1 to year 2 bump. There's no doubt that Mike Leach knows offensive football and playing better than they did a year ago. Perhaps that is in the cards for Mississippi State this season. They obviously be hard to play worse. They were pretty awful last year, with the exception of the week 1 upset win against LSU. But I'm still not buying into this. And frankly, when I, see what ESPN's trying to sell you in regards to Mississippi State here. It kind of makes me regret all the times over the years that I've cited FPI from ESPN as any kind of resource whatsoever, because, frankly, if this is what they're willing to publish and say this is our best effort at producing, not necessarily a prediction about on-field results, but analytics-type projections, if this is our best effort at doing so, and ESPN is willing to sign its name to this with Mississippi State there, number 8 in their preseason FPI, then frankly, I'm not quite so sure that's an analytics projection worth taking seriously. I think it is undoubtedly clear in my mind that Mississippi State's the worst team in the SEC West here this year. I think when you compare the big performance in year one from Sam Pittman, who has good coordinators, held on to Barry Odom on his defensive side of the ball, Kendall Briles, you want to give Leach credit for being a sharp offensive mind, and you probably should. But do you really think that at this stage of the game, based on what you saw a year ago, is Leach better at drawing up plays in the dirt right now than what Kendall Briles was able to do with Felipe Franks, who most people kind of laughed at? I mean, most people kind of thought that Franks was kind of a joke after his time at Florida, and essentially, completely wrote him off after he, left Dan Mullen, because Dan Mullen's supposed to be this quarterback whisperer. That's supposed to be a guy that's supposed to be able to get the most out of his quarterbacks, whoever it is. But clearly, Franks a year ago, working with Kendall Briles, was a better quarterback than he'd ever been with Dan Mullen there at Florida in the Florida program. And with Kendall Briles still in place there as the Arkansas offensive coordinator, it'd be impossible for me to rank Mississippi State ahead of Arkansas right now, to say nothing of what Ole Miss was able to do with Matt Corral a year ago. And Dave Bartu from College Football Matrix mentioned that on our show last week, that he thought that Corral was one of those diamonds in the rough getting ready for a big season. The problem for a guy like Leach, even on the heels of the steam that comes from being in ESPN's top 8 of its FBI projection, is it's just a very crowded SEC West right now. The top part of the division, the LSUs, the A&Ms, and the Alabamas, you're going to play all of them, and you probably expect 3 losses right there. But even if you just want to keep it to the other programs that are somewhat similar to you, first-year coach in Auburn and Brian Harsin, second-year coach at Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, second-year coach at Arkansas in Sam Pittman, there's something to like about all those programs, I would say even more so than what's going on for Mike Leach there at Mississippi State. Plus, just given the fact that, Leach has a tendency to say weird things, given the fact that Leach has a tendency to not quite get with the program of what the kind of buttoned-up, more professional world of the SEC looks like compared to the remote outposts that he's coached in before, places like, Pullman, Washington, Lubbock, Texas. These are kind of backwater, nowheresville type towns that a guy like Leach and his mercurial personality can kind of thrive in, because there's not much media there. In the SEC, there's just going to be a lot more scrutiny. Not only do I think that Mississippi State's the worst team in the SEC West this upcoming season, I think there's a chance this is Leach's last year in Starkville, simply on the basis of the fact that I just don't believe he's a great fit for the SEC. I think this upcoming season may be the time in which that kind of comes to full notice about by everybody else around the rest of the league. So here on SEC Country Live, we'll keep the conversation going here with our All Points Bulletin. We'll check in now in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I thought we got a very interesting statement recently from new Tennessee defensive line coach Rodney Garner. Now, Garner, by this point in time, has coached just about everywhere in the SEC. He's kind of bounced around a bunch. He's now there with Josh Heupel there in Knoxville, and when Garner met with reporters this week, one of the things he was kind of asked is, hey, how you getting settled in there? How you kind of feeling as you kind of, feel your way around what's happening? Are the players taking to you okay? Are they kind of responding to you in the way that you want to? And I thought Rodney Garner gave such a very funny description of kind of how he views his relationship with players and his feelings on what the players think about him at all. And this is great stuff from kind of an old school coaching mind and Rodney Garner. Take a listen to this from up there in Knoxville.
This is not a democracy. This is a benevolent dictatorship. That means it's loving, but it is only one way. And that's the only way it is. They do not vote. I have the only vote. I am the chief. They're all Indians. And so that's how we're going to do things. So it has not been as much pushback as you would think. I think they're obviously, there's one time, you were too. They're always going to try to test it and see where the line is and how far they can take it. But as long as you stay consistent in your message and what you're preaching and what you're teaching, but I do think that, they are buying into the teaching, and they do see a body of work that, I've been able to produce, throughout my career.
I think there's something about what Garner says there that's really quite refreshing. And as I said before, he's kind of been around, the SEC kind of all over the place here. But one of the things I kind of like from Gardner there is we're in this age of like transfer portal, and it seems like every coach is sort of forced to kind of tiptoe around the feelings of all his players because he's afraid that that player might get mad, go home, enter the transfer portal, go somewhere else. And it's kind of nice to hear a coach still sort of sound like a coach, if you know where I'm coming from on this, to say, hey, this is a dictatorship. Now, it's a benevolent dictatorship. I'm not looking to be some sort of tyrant here, but I'm not really quite worried about anyone's opinion other than my own. And the happiness that these players have playing for me is going to be determined by how well they kind of get with the program of what it is that I'm trying to do around here. I think that's really quite refreshing from Rodney Garner, and frankly, I think players kind of respond to that kind of stuff sometimes better than we sometimes think they would. In fact, I can tell you my own life. The idea of having a coach who cares about me that much to say, hey, listen, I'm going to kind of, hold you to standard. I'm going to lay down the law and then, hold you to it. Make sure you kind of live up to the very best version of yourself. Frankly, there are a lot of adults who sort of wish they still had some sort of coaching influence in their life like that. That it's kind of nice to hear in this particular case a coach say, hey, I'm a coach who's still going to act like a coach. I'm not out here trying to be, the cool dad. I'm not out here trying to be your friend. I'm trying to be your coach. I'm trying to get something out of you, trying to push you to be good, push you to be as good as you can be. And I think that's really a pretty good thing there, both in terms of what it could potentially mean for Tennessee, maybe, but certainly what it means for just college football all the way around. That there are at least still some coaches out there who are not living in total fear of the transfer portal. I got to tell you, I think that's probably a pretty good thing. Now, let's not get it twisted here on the subject of Tennessee just for a moment. As we mentioned a moment ago, the Vols getting their first commitment for the class of 2022 just here this very day. You've got, 5 players currently suspended on the Tennessee program for a moment. You've got guys like Quavaris Crouch and Henry To'oTo'o still in the transfer portal with really very little insight about what their future holds. It is a big-time uphill climb for the Tennessee Vols, and I think I wondered this aloud on last week's program. Just given the relative inexperience of Josh Heupel, this is still a pretty young guy. He's younger than 45. He's much younger than most of the other coaches in the SEC. He's been at UCF, been a big-time offensive coordinator before going back to his time at Missouri, but not quite the kind of coaching resume, the kind of coaching chops, I believe, to handle the situation that's about to be facing him there in Knoxville. It's one of the reasons why you got to have guys like Garner, on your staff and others who kind of feel like SEC veterans kind of understand how this league works. Because here's the problem with Tennessee, and I saw one of our commenters was kind of, I think it was kind of mocking, it was LB Elizabeth a moment ago, kind of mocking the Vols fans, kind of always thinking this is going to be their year. The fact of the matter, LB, is at this point in time, I'm not quite so sure how many Vols fans really even say that anymore. I mean, this Tennessee fan base is pretty dejected, and those schools who are big rivals of Tennessee, whether it be Florida or Alabama, I mean, y'all have kind of seen that, right? I mean, when was the last time Tennessee went into a game against Florida or went into a game against Alabama or maybe even a game against Georgia? It's probably been a number of years, really feeling like, hey, we think we got the kind of team here in Knoxville that has a chance to win this game. You're just not hearing much from Tennessee fans on that. Tennessee fans are pretty dejected because here's the thing that's just an undeniable fact when it comes to SEC football, that patience is a finite resource. Much the same way that, willpower can kind of be. It's like you can say no to a cookie, 5-6 times. If it's right there in front of you, after a while, eventually you're going to want to eat it. Patience sometimes is a finite resource like that. And when you give your patience over to Derek Dooley and come to find out Derek Dooley wasn't worth it, when you give your patience over to Butch Jones and come to find out Butch Jones wasn't worth it, when you give your patience over to Jeremy Pruitt, and Pruitt may have gotten some recruiting wins for you, but on the field, as it turned out, he just wasn't quite worth it. The headache that he created sometimes off the field just wasn't quite worth it. All of a sudden now you've given your patience to all these guys. We're going to give this guy some time to build a winner, and it just wasn't going anywhere. Too much sideways energy in the program. Once you kind of give all that stuff away, you got no patience left to give to a Josh Heupel. And so there's a part of me that wonders, was Heupel even smart to take this job? Yes, he's working for his old boss, Danny White. Maybe he feels like he's got some job security on that front. And this is not a troll against Tennessee fans. This is not me rubbing their face in the dirt. They've been through so much. But the Tennessee situation is so broken at the moment, even with veteran SEC guys like Rodney Garner. You're sort of left to wonder, is the actual job of fixing this, is the actual job of making Tennessee feel like Tennessee again, is a job like this just bigger than Josh Heupel? Is a job like this just bigger than what a guy like that brings to the table? The kind of stature that he has, is he big enough, substantial enough to meet this particular moment? Because here's the thing. Look, there was a time in which I might have told you, I don't think that Tennessee can compete for national championships anymore because there's just not fertile recruiting soil in that state there around Tennessee. It's not a great state for high school football the way that you think of some of the neighboring states in the SEC as kind of being. I honestly don't feel that way as much as I used to. There's so much national recruiting that goes on now in college football that Tennessee, which once made itself a power by recruiting nationally, that trend, as hot as it is in college football, there's no reason that under the right circumstances that Tennessee couldn't recruit nationally again. So many other programs are doing that kind of thing. But long way to go to reestablish what has been and become just kind of a tarnished brand. So if you're Josh Heupel, you need all the Rodney Garners you can get, guys who kind of bring a little bit of an SEC pedigree to the table, because right now Heupel, to me, looks like a guy who's overmatched and incapable of meeting the moment with a huge challenge awaiting him as he begins his career as Tennessee coach. APB rolls on here on SEC Country Live. Let's check in Athens, Georgia for a moment, where I thought that Georgia running back Kendall Milton, who's going into his second year in the program, former big-time recruit in the class of 2020, had something very interesting to say here this week, because the topic comes up, and Kirby Smart has said, listen, at Georgia, we want to be a vertical passing attack. That's what Smart has said, which would be a big departure from Georgia before. One of the knocks on Kirby Smart has been his hesitation, it would seem like, to establish Georgia as a passing attack the way that Alabama was last year. LSU's been before that. Florida was this past season along the way to winning the SEC East. But some people seem to believe, Kirby Smart seemingly validating, that this will be the year in which Georgia goes out there and throws the ball a whole lot more. Well, the obvious question that comes along the heels of that is, if Georgia's going to be throwing the ball all the time, what does that mean for the running backs? Guys like Milton, former elite recruits. Guys like James Cook, Zamir White, both guys who had a chance to go on to the NFL draft, made the decision to come back to Georgia here for the 2021 season. What happens to all these backs if Georgia's throwing the football? Well, Kendall Milton, going into his second year in the program, had something very interesting to say about that when he spoke with reporters on Tuesday. This is Kendall Milton.
This is Georgia's RBU, so I feel like the run game's always going to play a part in the offense, but we're an offense that has a lot of weapons all over the field, and with all those weapons, everybody wants to get the ball. So you got to make the scheme to where it fits everybody. It basically benefits everybody. So, I expect we're going to run the ball, but I also expect we're going to pass the ball because of our weapons and everything we have on the team.
So I think that's really interesting. And Milton says, hey, Georgia's still RBU, no matter what you've heard, no matter what you may expect with the passing game. He says, we're going to throw the ball at Georgia, but this is still going to be a team that's RBU. What I think is really interesting about that is, and this is one of the things where if you're not a Georgia fan, if you're a Florida fan and you want to see the Gators have a shot there in the SEC East, or if you're an Alabama fan who may be curious about if you win the SEC West again, who you might play in the SEC championship game. Here's one of the things I think is really interesting, that as so much attention has been paid to what Georgia's trying to do in the passing game, I think one of the things that's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit is that Georgia's not quite the rushing team that it used to be. Go back to 2017 and 2018, Georgia led the SEC in rushing yards per game. But over the course of the last two seasons, 2019 and 2020, Georgia actually fell to fifth in the SEC in rushing yards per game in both of those seasons. And, listen, I think the simplest diagnosis of all of that ends up being that once teams in 2019 discovered that the Georgia passing attack just wasn't going to be quite as potent, that it just wasn't going to be quite as dynamic throwing the ball down the field, whether because James Coley, his offensive coordinator, was a deficient mind, or because Jake Fromm had some struggles in his final year in the program, or the wide receiver situation didn't give Fromm the kind of targets he wanted to throw to. Once teams figured out in 2019 for Georgia that they could not worry about the passing attack, they started stacking the line of scrimmage, throwing more bodies at the Georgia running game, and then the Georgia rushing attack suffered as well. last season there was a lot of issues for Georgia quarterback. It was Dwan Mathis, the starting quarterback to begin the season, eventually giving way to Stetson Bennett, who eventually gave way to J.T. Daniels, and then finally at the end of the year you settled on J.T. Daniels as the starting quarterback there in Athens with the Dogs. But 3 different starting quarterbacks at various points of the year, and various levels of performance for the passing game under those 3 quarterbacks, and the rushing game also suffered because of that. So now you fast forward to 2021. Kendall Milton says, yes, Georgia is still RBU, but when you look at the horizon around college football and the way that offense just works, not just in the SEC with programs like Alabama and potentially LSU, but outside the SEC with the Ohio States, the Clemsons of the world, the only way to be, it would seem, to be an RBU style program that gives a lot of productivity, a lot of opportunities to its running backs, is to be so explosive with the passing attack that all of a sudden defenses can't key on one thing or the other. That it really does seem like we're in a completely different era. Now, listen, I'm a little bit of an old head, kind of more of an old school traditional approach from time to time. I think about the football the way that it used to be, and I'm kind of comforted by the idea of, hey, listen, in football these days, the way it used to be, you ran the ball, you established the run, then you did play action pass off of that. Once you showed that you were the more physical team, now you can throw the football and kind of put a team away. That's the exact opposite of what college football would seem to be in 2021. This has become a sport where on early downs, early in the game, first and second quarter, the team that throws the ball the best there, the team that goes for the killer instinct, explosive type plays early in the game, sets up an opportunity for running backs later on to go against a fatigue defense and go against a defense that kind of knows it's beaten. That in 2021, it's really more about using the pass to set up the run. So Kendall Milton says he believes that Georgia can still be RBU, is still RBU, but as the passing game goes, I think for Georgia that kind of determines just how much of an RBU-type team it really can be. That is our all-points bulletin as we bounce around the rest of the SEC. Really funny story coming up from Nick Saban before we get ready to wrap things up here today. Also want to take some time to get some of your comments. Good to see Cliff Nelson, by the way, in our Facebook comment section, representing some LSU here. He also gives me a go dogs because he knows I do Dog Nation Daily every single day. Cliff, I'm glad to have you here. Fun to have the conversation with you. Matt Talley also mentioning Kyle Pitts, a name that we mentioned off the top of the program, one of those unicorn players that Dan Mullen described him as being. And as I said off the top of the program, the problem with having a unicorn is that they truly are a one-of-one type category, and it becomes difficult to actually replace that going forward. So that's an issue that Florida's going to be dealing with as we kind of move forward here. Esteban Esteves checking in, and this is kind of first of all, this is an example of 2 things: the kind of chatter back and forth we get with fans on a show like this, and one of the issues that Georgia has to deal with. He says, and Esteban's an LSU fan, he says RBU and still not doing anything with it. And unfortunately for Georgia, that's really kind of the issue at stake here, is that Georgia has had as deep a stable of running backs really anyone, and unfortunately the offense has kind of stalled over the course of the last couple of years because it did not have the requisite passing game to go along with that. So Esteban's kind of, poking some Georgia fans in the side there, but unfortunately the results kind of speak for that Georgia does have to find that other gear offensively, and if it has that, if you can throw the ball, you can also run the ball as well. When LSU was throwing the ball all over the yard in 2019, Clyde Edwards-Helaire had 1,400 yards rushing go along with that. Najee Harris had a huge year for Alabama last season when Mac Jones was putting the ball in the air all the time. When you've got the passing game, you'll also have the running game. If you don't have the passing game, it seems like in 2021, you won't have the running game to go along with that either. Melda Sims Bruzy checking in to say, love those dogs. Melda, it's great to see you as part of the program here today. Chris Walshcott's checking in the program here today, too. Nice to see that. Good comments kind of rolling in all the way around. A very fun discussion of everything happening around the SEC here. And it's always nice to see our buddy Neil Calvino in here getting everybody stirred up. Hank Majors having some fun here, too. Listen, it's nice to see people having a good time all the way around. That's great to be able to see. We'll check in on YouTube here, and then we'll get ready to wrap things up on a great edition of our program here today. Mark Abe, thank you for the kind words. Mark encouraging folks on the YouTube side of things to give us some likes and all that kind of stuff. That's a great thing to be able to do, Mark. I really appreciate that. Obviously, we're starting this up after having not done it for a while there, so we do need to kind of get the word out that we're doing the show. So in addition to giving us likes and things along those lines, you can just simply tell people, hey, did you hear SEC Country's back? Did you hear they're talking SEC football? And it's it's a chance to, obviously I do Dog Nation Daily every single day, so I'm always talking Georgia football, but this is also a chance to talk some Bama, talk some LSU, talk about the rest of the league there as well, and to really give you all a platform back and forth to talk to each other, because I know a lot of you like doing that there as well. This is a chance to do all of that, which I'm really happy to be able to do, and certainly makes it nice for you guys to be able to do it there as well. Damian Cox checking in from Anderson, South Carolina. I appreciate that. By the way, Rashad Bourne checking in on the YouTube side of things. He doesn't like the idea of UGA as RBU. He says, how is UGA RBU? He says Chubb was a second rounder. He's a good back. Michelle was the first rounder. He says DeAndre Swift has been hurt. He says one school has 7 backs and 2 Pro Bowlers, all still active in the NFL. He says, guess which one that is? Rashad, a big Bama fan, saying RBU, DBU, linebacker U. Bama is just NFL U. Listen, there's by the way, Michael Carfell, our producer, giving you a little editorializing there as he shows Herschel Walker, if you want to go back to the past and all of that. But look, obviously the debate about which SEC school is RBU is kind of going to go on forever and forever and forever. Pretty clearly Georgia has put a lot of backs into the NFL in recent years. You don't mention Todd Gurley, who's coming to the end of his career there. But listen, there's no doubt Alabama's had a lot of success there in that regard, too. So those are the kind of fun debates we're able to have on this program, and I'm sure stuff like that will be ongoing in the days to come. So, Rashad, I appreciate you kind of weighing in on that, whether you want to go back in time to the Herschel days, the modern times, some of the guys that Bama has in the league right now. Now, I also think that if you want to start talking about injured running backs, you're going to be careful about talking about that too much. But pretty clearly, listen, Derrick Henry's one of the most fun players to watch in all the NFL, so you've obviously got a kind of a good thing going with all of that. So on Facebook and YouTube, we look forward to taking your comments. That's always a fun thing for us to be able to do. And we always like to end the show on kind of a light note, and this is really a fun one today. So we call this our SEC LOL. It's a chance to enjoy some humor on the way out the door. So Nick Saban the other day was speaking at kind of one of these coaching conferences that goes on, and this is kind of more of a keynote address. I think at one point in time he actually kind of got in there and did some actual teaching, but he was kind of giving a keynote address, and he told a story, and I've heard him tell this story before. I think this story's also actually been told by other people as well. It's kind of one of those jokes that kind of gets borrowed a little bit. Now here's what I'm going to tell you. You've got to try to go out of your way to find this yourself, because the actual story that Saban tells is about 2 minutes long. I've condensed it. I've cut it at least in half because of the time that we have here. This is so funny from Nick Saban, and if you ever thought that Saban's just kind of one of these dry guys that has no personality whatsoever, that may be what he shows to the media, but that's not exactly what he brings to the table for himself. This, an example of that. Very funny story about Saban, his wife, Miss Terry. You may have seen this already, but for those of you who haven't, this is our SEC LOL for today. Take a listen to this.
They had a homecoming day for Nick Saban. But when I was a kid growing up, my dad owned a service station. And my wife, I tried to date from the time I was in the 7th grade, she would never, ever date me. She had this guy named Mickey Schaefer that she was always boyfriend with. And here I am, the country bumpkin out here, pumping gas every day. So finally, when I got in high school, she finally noticed me. And she had dated this Mickey Schaefer guy for like 6 years. So when we go back for this reunion, lo and behold, Mickey Schaefer owns a service station. So I said, I am not going to miss the opportunity to do a drive-by, just to make sure she kind of knows how she picked. I said, if you'd have married him, that's where you'd be now. She said, bull, if I'd have married him, he'd be the head coach at Alabama now.
So I think that's really funny. And, you don't really quite get the full sense of the story because I cut a lot of it out, but Saban's comedic timing is actually really good. The pauses that he gives, the laughter kind of builds. As I said before, these coaches and Saban and Kirby's like this, and there are a couple other guys in the SEC that are kind of probably that same way. Certainly Bill Belichick at the NFL level is kind of like that, where they're just so gruff and they never break character, and they're always just kind of mumbling in monotone language. But you get a guy like this around other coaches, and you really do see the personality come out. So funny story there about Miss Terry. Just really good stuff all the way around. A fitting SEC LOL for today, certainly for sure. and a good job by Nick Saban telling a funny story. Check it out for yourself. You can hear the longer version and by the way, the uncensored bleep version there as well. So it's all really pretty funny stuff all the way around. I really appreciate you being here for SEC Country Live here today. And as one of our commenters on YouTube said a moment ago, really encourage you to do anything you can to share the show. That means actually share it with your friends on Facebook. Give us those likes. Subscribe to the SEC Country Live YouTube page. Just let folks know we're out here doing this, talking SEC. We'll do it every Wednesday at 3. Who knows how the show may kind of grow from there. But for now, it's once a week here at Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Thanks for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you back here again next week at this time. For those of you getting ready for spring games on Saturday, hope you enjoy those. We'll be back to recap them next week. It's SEC Country Live. We'll talk to you again next Wednesday, everybody.